Let's get the latest on the Israel-Hamas war, and for that we turn to national security analyst Hal Kempfer. Hal, always good to see you. A lot to get into today. Let's get straight into it. Israeli warplanes bombed Iran's embassy in Syria today, marking an escalation in a war that is pitting Israel against many of its Iran-backed regional adversaries. Tehran has said that the strike killed 7 military advisors, including 3 senior commanders. Hal, Israel targeting an Iranian embassy directly in daylight. This seems like a significant escalation. Does this feel like it falls within the unwritten rules of this war?
Austin, it is a significant escalation. There's just no two ways to put it. I mean, they hit a diplomatic compound. Now, Israel, even though they don't admit that they actually attacked a diplomatic compound, they say it's a separate building. It's not part of the embassy complex. I've heard it described as a consulate. I've heard it described as a consular section of the embassy in a separate annex building. But whatever it is, it's normally considered under international law sovereign territory of that nation, Iranian territory. So technically, this strike was on Iranian territory. Obviously, a strike on territory could be met with a variety of levels of force. And certainly Iran has said that they will respond very strongly. However, with that said, there's a lot of reasons why Iran does not want to get into a war with Israel, nor the United States for that matter. And so it's not quite clear what that response will be. And there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on Khamenei and his regime, his very religious right, if you will, Shiite theocracy, to do something. And of course, the Al-Quds force probably represents the militant arm of that theocracy. But generally within Iran, they do not want to get into a war because they know they could lose. And Hezbollah will also be dragging their feet, as they have since it began, because they know they could lose too. So yes, this is an escalation. It potentially could cause a major regional war to break out, theoretically. But with that said, there's also a lot of pushback, if you will, force fields, if you will, pushing back away from escalation beyond too much further than what it is.
As discussed, Iran is not being shy about wanting to respond to this attack. What avenues do they have in order to respond?
Well, they've already done some things. Hezbollah did some attacks. There was an attack, I believe, at the temps base, U.S. base in Syria, which hasn't been attacked, I think, since February, is my recollection. There was also a report of missiles and drones in the Red Sea fired by Houthis. And there was also a report that an Israeli Israeli naval base in the south was attacked by Houthi rebels firing a long-range missile. All of these things are, they could be seen as response. I have to tell you, within the context and the level of fighting that's been going on, they don't really stand out as exceptional. It's almost like Monday in that war, so within the region. So I mean, yes, it's technically a response, but you have to remember, from Khamenei's standpoint, from a nationalist standpoint in Iran, they do feel compelled to do something. I mean, if you look at that building, they dropped that entire annex building. That is a comprehensive strike. That is not a little strike. That building is rubble. It's on the ground. Now, I will point something out here, which I found rather interesting. Look at the buildings around it. They don't appear to be extensively damaged, which gives you an idea of the precision with which the Israelis, if that was an Israeli strike, the precision of the strike that took place, that was able to completely destroy that building, yet the buildings around it are relatively undamaged by comparison. It really is a stunning picture of some of the precise weaponry that can be employed these days, certainly by the U.S. and its allies. And it's probably more likely than not, even though Israel has not acknowledged this, that this truly was an Israeli strike that took this building down.
Why is it when we hear of Israel attacking places in southern Lebanon, when we hear them doing their back and forth with Hezbollah, why is it that Israel takes responsibility for those types of attacks, but why is it that they might stay silent on one like this specifically?
Certain types of attacks, there is no gain by taking responsibility on this. In fact, there is by taking gain, it can be interpreted regionally as almost boastful. Basically, it would be to accelerate the situation if Israel is to go in there and do a strike like this, and then come out publicly and say, "Oh yes, we did this strike." That puts phenomenal pressure on Iran. It puts pressure on Hezbollah and others to respond in a more forceful way than they might otherwise. So there is no gain for Israel to acknowledge that they did this strike. And so on this one, they're going to stay quiet. And by the way, Israel has stayed quiet on other strikes, although Israel does have a history of when they do strikes, for example, in the Gaza Strip. If there's controversy on that, they will do an investigation. They will come out and explain if they did it. And in some cases, they've made mistakes. And they've been very forthright in admitting they made mistakes in targeting. In other cases, there was a lot of Hamas propaganda trying to misconstrue what the strike was or the effects of the strike. And they've come out and put out a corrective message on that. Although I will say on that latter, I don't think the world listens too much. The Hamas message, as they say, there's an old saying that the lie will travel the world 10 times before the truth gets out the door. And same thing with some of this propaganda. It tends to get out there, set the stage for the story, and whatever investigation comes back later, it's very tough to correct whatever that initial narrative was that was put forth.
What do we know about who exactly was targeted in this attack? As I said earlier, 7 military advisors, including 3 senior commanders. Do we know what exact operations these operatives were undertaking? What kind of activities were they involved in?
Well, Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Zahadi was basically the Al-Quds commander, if you will, for Iraq and Syria. He was the lead for that area. And it's not been confirmed yet, but it sounds like he was leading a high-level meeting. His deputy was in that meeting with him, and other key decision makers, other key coordinators, if you will, of not just what the IRGC and Al-Quds is doing in that region, but also what their proxies are doing in that region. Were meeting in there. Now, it's not quite sure what they were meeting on. It's not quite sure if maybe there was some planning that was taking place or something like that, but it was a very targeted strike mission going after command and control targets, for lack of a better term. And it appeared to hit exactly what they were aiming at, and it appeared to be very much confined. Again, I point back to the precision of the strike and the fact that the buildings around it are still left standing, looking largely intact, while the building itself with the intended targets has completely collapsed and was destroyed. So that's kind of what you saw in there. And I would say this: behind the 2020 strike by the U.S. in Iraq on Major General Soleimani, the head of the Al-Quds force, the IRGC Major General, that short of that, this is the most high-level strike we've seen against IRGC and Al-Quds since 2020 in the last 4 years.
We'll be watching the situation closely out of Syria and Iran. I do want to move on, Hal. This tweet coming in from a Reuters reporter: the Biden administration is weighing whether to go ahead with a major $18 billion package of arms transfers to Israel that would involve 25 F-15 aircrafts and munitions, according to 3 sources familiar with the matter, telling Reuters on Monday. A Reuters source says that the sale of the 25 planes has been under review since January of 2023, but Israel's defense minister wants the delivery to be sped up. Hal, what could be the use for these F-15s in the immediate to near future on the Israeli side?
Austin, these F-15s are not the F-15s of yesteryear. F-15 as a platform has been around for a very long time. I mean, some will remember, it's like, I think the F-15s came into service back in the early 70s. Well, they did come into service in the 70s, but this current F-15 is dramatically modified. It's an air superiority aircraft. It has tremendous strike capabilities. It carries a lot of different weapon systems, carries a lot of different avionics, carries a lot of unusual things. It's not a stealth aircraft per se, although it does have a number of things that make it less easily detected, if you will, in flight. So it's a air superiority aircraft in any way of describing it. So that's why they want it. It gives them a a huge advantage in air-to-air combat and strike mission capability throughout the region, which is what they need, and that's why they want it in. Now, this is saying 25. I was reading a report that said when it's all said and done, it could get up to 50 of these F-15 aircraft. So it's quite a capability that we'll bring in, and obviously they want to get it sooner rather than later. They could certainly use it now if they had it. The other thing too to point out is that Israel already has a large cadre of F-15 qualified pilots, a lot of them with tremendous combat experience. So their ability to assimilate and absorb a large aircraft shipment like this is very fast. It's very different than, say, Ukraine, where we had to train these pilots to fly F-16s. They already have pilots that are very well trained and experienced flying F-15. So it's one of these things, when they arrive, they can put them right into service.
I do want to talk about Gaza real quick before we go here. Let's look at this tweet from the Washington Times. We're hearing reports saying that Israeli military has withdrawn from Gaza's largest hospital early Monday after a 2-week raid that engulfed the facility and surrounding districts in fighting. The IDF has described the raid on Shifa Hospital as a major battlefield victory in the war. Now, as this Shifa operation comes to an end, Hal, I want to reflect on this a bit. Why was this raid significant, and what did we learn about how Hamas uses hospitals specifically in this war?
Austin, that question is the heart of the matter, which is Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad both use hospitals, mosques, schools, what under international law are considered protected sites. They're not supposed to be targeted. They use them for military purposes. Under international law, when you use even a protected site for military purposes, it loses its protected status. That's what Hamas has done with hospitals. They've also done with schools and mosques and other sites, even aid centers, if you will, throughout Gaza. And of course, their goal is, if the Israelis strike them, they then reach out across the world to try to foment hue and cry about striking these facilities. And they also keep civilians around them, so whatever happens, they want to maximize the amount of civilian casualties in whatever Israeli military action would take place. That appears to be what happened here. You may recall that Al-Shifa was previously did have the Israelis go in there. The Israelis found tunnels around that complex that was covered for quite some time, that it was being used as a command and control. Now, one of the things I point out is Israel, even though they occupy, if you will, the northern area completely, and they have freedom of movement, they still have been taking fighting up there. And my this is just experience talking. Why would they go to all the trouble of hitting that hospital, knowing they're going to take international condemnation for hitting the hospital? Because they must have had very compelling intelligence saying that this is where they are. This is what it's being used for. And that's why they went in there. And certainly if you look at what came out of it, the number of prisoners, the number of militants that were killed, all the intelligence, weapons, everything else that came out of that hospital, it's absolutely clear that that hospital was being used for military purposes. But I think within the Israeli calculus, the IDF calculus, if they didn't have overwhelming intelligence, probably intelligence they've garnered in the last few weeks prior to going in there, I don't think they would have gone in there, just because of the international backlash that inherently occurs by going into a hospital complex.
All right, Hal, we'll have to leave it there for now. We always appreciate your insight. Have a good day.